I'd like to welcome everyone to the 18th edition of the Bend Film Festival. And I want to welcome everyone for staying and listening to our question and answer session with the film director and producer, Mr. Sky Wallen and Mr. Jeff Hammer. How are you doing tonight, gentlemen?
Doing great.
Doing well. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Like I said, I want to get the quick formalities out the way. My name is Marcus LeGrand. I am a local educator and activist, but most of all, I just love movies and I just love the human story and the human connection when we have those. So I just want to jump into a few questions, and I know Sky had already started going into how you met Mr. Reval and everything, and how you met the teenagers. But one of the things that I wanted to know is, what is one of the things I would like to know about the movies? How were you able to tell the human story, but also what inspired you to create the film in the first place?
So I mean, I was, as I was saying earlier, I was a big fan of Mike Gravel, and just as a teenager myself, and followed his career, and always wanted to tell a story about him through film. And yeah, I know I read about these kids who were tweeting on his behalf and running his second presidential campaign with him as the oldest person in American history to ever run for president. And I thought this was a really funny, kind of wonky way to tell a story about Mike's past, as well as a story about contemporary politics and youth involvement. So yeah, I mean, I'm deeply passionate about Mike, and I think he's a fascinating historical figure in American politics, who has been largely ignored and kind of swept under the rug, probably because he has questioned power a little too much, and power doesn't like that. And when you question power and speak truth to power, power tends to shut you out, basically, get you off the radar of the public. So yeah, I mean, so that's kind of my roots in the story. And then yeah, I mean, with regard to the human element, yeah, I'm interested in politics and political movements and history. But as a filmmaker, it was very important to me to not be making a propaganda movie. I do have bias, as anyone, but I'm definitely like pro Mike Gravel, I would say. But it's important to me not to be making a puff piece, and so I think focusing on the human stories over the issue. The issues are in there; they're inherent in this story. But I didn't want to focus just solely on one issue, make it an issue film. There's many issues addressed, but it was important to me to keep the story about the kids, their relationship with each other, and their relationship with Mike. And that way, for me, it holds to be a little more timeless of a story. So
Jeff, what did you come into the picture with the story?
I came in pretty much right away. Sky and I had worked with each other, and he called me one night and said, "Hey, I know what I want to do next, and I want to do a documentary." And so it took me a little by surprise, because we'd only been talking about narrative stuff, in the months leading up to it. But then when I started looking into it, I became, more intrigued. I mean, because when he first told me, the headline reads more like an Onion headline, and so it seemed much more like a joke. But then when I looked into it and saw that, they were doing this, it was just this very unusual, quixotic attempt to get on the debate stage in the DNC debates. And ultimately, it's I'm a political junkie, and so I'm very interested in it. But it was also something where it became interesting just to see that these 17, 18-year-olds were actually putting into practice what we're all taught in school when we're younger. You're taught that democracy is something that everyone can participate in, and everyone has a fair shot. And as you get older, you realize that that's not the case at all. But these kids were cynical, but also very optimistic in terms of, let's do it. Let's try to get on like, the radar, and even they exceeded their own expectations. I don't think they ever envisioned that they were going to get as much, press, or get to the point where they made Senator Gravel like a legitimate, like, candidate, like who could have been up on stage and like, pushing, his agenda and pushing like, the progressive agenda. And so then it was just a matter of like, okay, well, how do we put it together?
And I love the way that you guys filmed this. It seems like you guys did it from more of a civil engagement perspective rather than Gavel's politics. And I think the kids in Capitol Hill did it a lot in the way they went about basically running this campaign. That being said, how were you guys able to show not only the students' relationships, but also show them understanding how the process worked?
I mean, I think it just comes like, fortunately, I mean, the thing that's interesting about documentaries, it's like, it's not the traditional casting process that you do in narrative film, but you are casting them to a degree, like, by choosing to follow them around. And there's an adage that, so much of performance, like 90% is casting, whether it's like the actors themselves or the crew. And I think the same thing was here. Like, we just cast, the right subjects, to follow, who were very sharp and incisive. And so much of it was just sit them down and turn on the camera and let them say their piece, whether it was, the kids themselves or the senator, like, who obviously had decades of experience of like, giving interviews and like, speaking his mind and like expressing his worldview. And yeah, and then for a lot of it, it was just a matter of like, okay, where do we need to be at a particular moment? And let's just start like, capturing it. And then so much of it is like, in documentary, it's very different. So much of it comes through like, the editing, and you're just grabbing as much footage as possible. But we just had just so much gold. Like, there was so many like insightful, poignant, like, moments that it's like, all right, how do we actually take out some of these moments, because we had more than enough.
Yeah, I remember Henry in particular. He could go on for a long time, and everything he was saying was a nugget of gold, And I remember it was after the Miami debates that night. It was very, very late, and we got back to the hotel extremely late, and everyone's exhausted, but we had to wrap up interviews because the kids had to fly out at like 7 a.m. It was probably 3 a.m. or 2. I think it was 2. And so I sit down for interviews, and Henry, sit down with Henry. He chugs a Red Bull, and I'm like, oh man, this is going to be, he's going to go for a while, and it's all going to be good. But I'm like, about to pass out here. But yeah, there was a good problem to have kids who just kept saying really insightful stuff. And their civic literacy is, unparalleled. I think I would say they know more about civics than some people that are actually in civics. And it was they're wise beyond their years. So it was kind of just buckle in and follow them. And then we had Dave Weigel from the Washington Post help break down what for the layman, like, what are they trying to do from a macro point of view, and like, what is their political strategy here from an outsider's perspective. So
yeah, I mean, Dave Weigel and Jamie Kyles of New York Times Magazine, like, those two journalists were some of the last interviews that we got, and they ended up being instrumental, because we just realized that we understood a lot of the stuff, I mean, Sky and I, but we just knew that, okay, if we want to appeal, like, to people like who aren't following things as close as we are, we need essentially like translators, and they ended up being ideal subjects. Like, they, again, like, everyone pretty much exceeded our expectations when it came down to like, sitting down, just laying it out. And so, yeah, we can't thank those two enough.
And I think you basically the same term I like to use all the time is put it where the goats can get it. They made it simple, easy, nothing complex. So my question is, knowing that they are so engaged in terms of the political side of things, do they understand how that translate over into the community? Do they have an understanding of that piece of it too?
I don't know. I don't know them well enough, like, personally. And I think they probably understand a little bit more. But again, like they're 17, 18, when we were filming them. I mean, they're all like in their early 20s now. But I think it's as smart as they are. And again, like their intellects are collectively are pretty staggering. But if you don't live on your own and pay all your own bills and like, do all these things that, the adult world has to do, there's only so much, that you can like, understand. I think you give them some time and they'll have like, a much better understanding. But I think all four of them like grew up with pretty insulated like childhoods. Like, we didn't get to like, we have some footage of like the school that three of them, went to, and it's a pretty nice, private school that is amazing for the students who are there and like, the educational opportunities. But I think you go 30 miles south into different parts of New York City, and it's just a completely different world that they know about intellectually, but in terms of like practically, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely true. But I also think that they have an astute understanding of the repercussions that are being caused by moderate politics that have been going on for many decades now, and the cost of I think they have a good understanding of the macro effects that we are in a sharp decline as a global society, and it's largely caused by the politics of moderation, that and you can see how it's unfolding in the reconciliation bill right now is not enough, too much focus on, oh, we need to be moderates, and we need to compromise with each other and bring things down and kind of go the easy path. They're very much against that because it's definitely caused more suffering than a more aggressive political strategy, I think.
It's definitely, I totally understand that point of view. My thing is, though, you think they have an opportunity to still maybe take some of the tenets of direct democracy and wedge into whatever they're trying to do, or you think they're just going to just stick whatever Mr. Gravel or Senator Gravel was going after?
I mean, go ahead.
Oh, I mean, I think so. I mean, the Grisbell Institute their focus right now is creating like, film content to like, combat some of like, the right wing extremist thought, that's being, put out there. And I think that it's something that they believe in. And it's just a matter of like, how I think it's a little bit of baby steps in terms of like, implementing it. But I mean, to an extent, like, California already does like, direct democracy in terms of like, what, Senator Gravel would want on a national level, like, with a series of state referendums that are on like, statewide, ballot initiatives. So like there is a model like, for it. And then it's just a matter of, them keeping active and engaged and like, trying to get it out there more into the, the political ecosystem. And it's going to probably take a few cycles. But to me, like that was one of the most intriguing things, because I'd never heard of a federal politician talking about it like, quite as succinctly and eloquently as Gravel did. So I hope it's something that they still like, push for, because they are right. Like there's a number of like, comments that they make, throughout the film where just like, there are some things that if you look at, the population as a whole in this country that are pretty popular. But because of the specific process, with the electoral process and like how, it's set up, it's hard to push things, through. And like to an extent, yes, we need to give like the Wyomings, and the Dakotas of the world a little bit of outsized like, influence, because you don't want everything decided by California and New York. But at the same time, if we are going to be a representative democracy, there should be things that the entire population, like, votes on, like, with majority votes. And I think that that would be really interesting to get to the point, because you also look at it like most states, like, the rules of the Senate also were electoral elections until less than 100 years ago. And so we've changed that on the state level, where it's just a majority vote in every single state that votes, that votes for our governors and our US senators. So I do think that there is a world where I don't see us ever giving up the Senate model where everyone gets 2 senators, but I do think that there's a world where we could have a popular vote for a federal election, because we look at, there's been one election in the last 30 years that has gone to like a GOP candidate, and yet we have had like, more than, or roughly half the time, and an outsized influence like on the judicial system with literally a minority, like, party.
Definitely. Well stated.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just add that, I think with their foundation of the Gravel Institute, they're going to champion ideas that Mike believed in, but they're also going to go further and grow. And the world's sadly Mike passed, but so new issues will arise, and the kids have also a big focus, like just like Mike did, on international affairs, and they're trying to educate people about the history of Brazil, for example, and what happened there, and with the U.S. meddling in that country, and as it relates to the current crisis there. So I think they are figuring out a way to weave direct democracy into their messaging. I think it's just going to take some time for them to really, because it's a hard issue to broach in terms of the public. I think you have to do it in a way that's simple to understand. I think they're kind of getting there. So
for me, listening to, and hearing what the young man talked about all the time, was that we want an inclusive model. And I know that's where Gravel was coming from as well. I think the civil rights movement is, that's the total catalyst for that, want an inclusive model where everybody comes in. For me, where I have a little bit of pause, I guess, or a little, I'm not gonna say disdain, but it's a little issue with the system at large, is that you have a narrative where everybody will be included. Why is it not that been amplified? Why isn't that information not readily coming to everyone like everything else does, or these snapshots of stuff that we get?
Yeah, it's baked into the DNA of like, what our you just got to go back to like, the history, and like the only way that we get the 13 colonies to like unite was to like go through a compromise, and to give, like, South Carolina was the last state to sign on. And like, personally, I don't want to follow South Carolina, like, with like, our political future, but some of that, is still there. Like, there was the same things that were being talked about. Like, we don't want Boston and Philadelphia and New York to like dictate policy to, this nascent country. And so much of it, like, is still like, residual from that. And but I don't think any of the founding fathers, like, ever envisioned a country where you have like nearly 40 million people in California that have the same Senate representation of like an Alaska. Or when you look at some of these sparsely populated, states that have a disproportionate, like, influence on the federal level. I mean, maybe the southern states envision this, but yeah, it's I know, it's frustrating.
But at the same time, these are some of the same founding fathers that wanted to have slavery to perpetuity. But
Absolutely.
I'll digress.
no, you're right. They're not God. They're not gods, and that's one thing I respect about Mike, is that he never. We have a tendency to hero worship some of these people, and I wouldn't. Well, I don't want to get into it, but we do it all the time. I mean, there's puff pieces left and right. We got I don't want to name names of other documentaries coming out, but we shouldn't treat these people like they're gods, because
I mean, I think you can recognize like some of the brilliant things that they did. Like, I'm a huge Jeffersonian, like in terms of some of the things that he did, but also like obviously a deeply, like, anyone who owned another human being, like, you have to just call it for what it is. Like, they were capable of evil. And so I think there just needs a more nuanced, like, conversation. And like Gravel was always like ahead of his time, with that. Now, do I think that, like, he is 100% evil? No. But obviously, if you get to the point where you think that that's okay, I don't care if that was societally accepted or not. Like, there is like a deep, human flaw. And that's what I find fascinating, is that the same person who could write, something as eloquent and ambitious and idealistic as the Declaration of Independence owned other human beings. Like, one of the great leaders, like, I don't think anyone but George Washington could have started and held the Union together as the first presidents, and was a tremendous leader, like, was military and politically, but again, owned other human beings. So it's like a really interesting dynamic. Or then you look at John Adams, who, one of his first major cases as an attorney was representing, the Boston Massacre, like British soldiers.
Yeah.
It's like, it was
as a lawyer. Yeah.
Yeah, as an attorney. So it's just, we had like really interesting, brilliant, but deeply flawed people, like, who shaped, our country. And a lot of it they got right, but other aspects they got very wrong. And you need noisemakers like, Senator Gravel and like the Gravel teens to try to trumpet some of these things out there. And then it's just a matter of like, if the messaging is done appropriately so that it's received by people, or if it'll fall on some deaf ears, but hopefully it, seeps into more of the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add a little bit that, like, a lot of people got angry that the kids were attacking other candidates so harshly on the debate stage, and their point was that, well, they are standing for policies that they view as deeply unethical. If you're standing there saying that defending drone attack policy, well, you're defending, the bombings of, the president recently droned a entire family of children, and so I think it's a family of 7 with five little babies during the Afghanistan retreat. So, we can talk about the founding fathers, but these people are here today, and if you're defending these kind of policies, well, they're going to call you, and you get a lot of, well, we need to defend Democrats because we can't let Republicans win. Okay, well, so we have to defend atrocious policy because we don't. I mean, then who are we? If we just sign up, we just can't let them win. So we can't say anything bad about the D team. How do you get better? Mike always said, people say, don't attack America if you love it, but he would say, no, I love this country. That's why I criticize it, because I want this thing that I love to be better, and it makes me so sad to see it commit atrocities.
That's, it's an old argument of like, it's like, love it or leave it. It's kind of like, well, no, it's like, if you're talking to your, as a parent, I don't like look at my kids and just say everything is great about them. Like, it's just like, you have to critique them and criticize them, when necessary, and do it constructively. And I think that's what Gravel and like, other people like in his ilk are trying to do. Like, you have to point out, like, yes, I believe that we are an amazing country, and debatably maybe the greatest country, ever. But that doesn't mean that we have some deep-seated flaws that don't need to be addressed and need to be, really talked about. And unfortunately, I think there's a sizable portion of this country, probably a majority, that just aren't ready to have the conversation. And that's what's great about, like, the youths, is that they don't have the patience, and in some ways it's just like they'll learn some patience, but I also just like the moxie that they have. It's like, well, why should we be patient? Like, why should we allow like a glacial progress to happen when there is an opportunity to enact some change? Or they maybe are savvier than we give them credit for, and there's like, we're going to shoot way beyond what we think we're going to get, but we're going to, if we push way out there and then we come back and get here, all right, that's where the progress, is happening. And then you just incrementally, keep pushing, the envelope, to the left. Like, in my opinion, like pretty much every single great thing that's happened in this country has been like a progressive idea, whether it came from a quote unquote liberal or a conservative. like all the great things that, have made us unique as a country have been progressive thoughts.
But I think really one thing the young men did really well, and I know our time's getting short, but I think they really did well, is they took the systems that we currently have in place in terms of communication and technology and utilized it to their advantage, because they understand it and how to utilize it. And also at the same time, us, when we were teens, we probably were impatient too. We thought, we knew everything in comparison to our parents. But these young men, I'm glad that they're gifted in knowing what the process looks like, but at the same time, they know the information behind it. But one thing that kind of made me think a little bit, and just want to ask you guys really quick, is do you think, because that is the system we all use to communicate right now, is it really helping or hindering the messages really getting out?
I think it's both, like anything. I think that one positive is that we got a lot of disaffected youth online, that they know about climate change, and they know about the wars and the inequality and the racism, and they know about all these problems, and a lot of them are very lost, in terms of finding solutions. So I think that in terms of finding those people and giving them an avenue towards solutions and giving them a community, that's a very positive thing. Now, and I also think that there's a way to attack people online that can be effective in terms of like attacking public figures. Now, there's also the flip side to everything, and I think that you end up with these bubbles on the internet, and those bubbles are no longer interacting with the other bubbles. So you end up kind of becoming in this insulated environment, which then that does increase the divide in the country, because I still think there's a lot of commonality in red states and blue states in terms of people. Like if you actually just got people together to talk about things, there would be a lot of commonalities. But online, you lose the face. People in person, they don't talk to each other like this. So I think that social media also, of course, Facebook, and I mean these are dangerous companies that are running these platforms. So
I mean, it comes out, it's just a tool, and it's just like, the printing press was like, revolutionary in terms of like, getting like, information out to the masses, like, as long as you were able to read. Now, at least in most, well, I don't even want to say most countries, but many countries, like, the majority of the population can read. And so they can communicate, with each other. And so like, there are less barriers, that, come on. But again, it just, I don't know how you go about like, regulating it in a country that's free speech, like, unless it's like dangerous or like, blatant lies. Like, I don't know. So I think there's great things that, you can get the message out easily and effectively. And if it like, catches fire, great. But then you can also have the, deliberate misinformation that can also spread like, by wildfire, just to.
I would second that. And this is coming as a progressive, it is very concerning, the growing sort of like monitoring of and restriction of people's speech online. I mean, because while in the short term, we want misinformation about the vaccine misinformation, we want that stuff controlled, I guess, but I promise you, and it started to happen, it will come back to bite us all. It's already happened to people on the left. So once you start saying this is true or this is not true, this may be a little controversial, but that to me is not a progressive thing. And I think it's a very difficult topic, but we have to kind of be careful. I know we're a little off topic, but I mean, I would hate to see a campaign like the Gravel Institute, what the Gravel kids did, end up getting monitored and getting blocked and getting censored, because, oh, well, this is, because what they were doing was throwing, big rocks and making big statements. And I could easily see that kind of stuff getting flagged, I guess we might call it, and taken down. And maybe a future Gravel campaign's entire campaign might get taken down because of what the kind of language that they use. So I would just urge caution in terms of letting a few elites that are in charge of these awful companies monitor what passes as true or false.
So what kind of future do you see for these young men? What do you see them doing?
In some cases, I think, the world is their oyster. I mean, they are highly educated. They come from privileged backgrounds. So like they've already lucked out in the lottery of life. And then I could see a couple of them running for office in the future. I could see some of them just doing nothing with politics, but staying engaged. So I think they could do, if they want to work hard and commit to something, I think they really could do any number, like Henry Williams is someone who is like a physics, math, computer science, guru. And so obviously he's got a very astute understanding of politics. If he wants to go into politics, I could see a career in that, but he could also just be like, I want to do something that's very STEM related, and just dive headfirst into that. So I think it really just comes down to what they want to do. And again, ultimately, they're still like 20, 21, maybe 22 years old. They're still, in the grand scheme of things, pretty young, and they can go any number of different directions. And maybe in 5-10 years, they find something completely different. But I hope that at least one of them runs for office and is a saber rattler,
Yeah.
like they have been in this campaign.
Yeah, I could see like Elijah and Henry possibly running for office or being involved with the campaign.
Either, I think McGowan would be great too.
Then, yeah, McGowan. I kind of see David as getting into scholarship. I see him. That's kind of where I see him going.
Yeah,
but that's
scholarship. He would be like support. I think maybe a chief of staff, but I think that I could be wrong. I don't know if if he would even want to, but yeah, I could definitely see David as an academic.
Mm-hmm. All right. So really quick, then we're going to start wrapping up. So really quick, I want to thank you guys for American Gadfly. I thought it was phenomenal.
Thank you.
It was a great human story. Really quick, where is your film being distributed?
We can announce this now because we are signed. And right now it looks like it's going to be January. We haven't gotten the official release date yet, but that's what we've been told. And I don't know what platform it's going to be on, but with this distributor who's a fairly major well-known distributor, we'll be on all of the normal online platforms. Which ones remains to be seen. We're still in the process. They've got to go through all the paperwork and make sure that we have everything buttoned up. I mean, we do, but they have to verify it. And yeah, I would imagine that all of the most or all of the streaming platforms that most people consume content on, it'll be available there.
Yeah, please support us.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, support us. Keeping look at the website AmericanGadflyMovie.com. Look at the Twitter, from the film. Look at the Gravel Institute Twitter. If you follow any of these things, we will be updating folks as soon as we have more information. But right now, we're going to put a pin at some point in January that'll be commercially available for the masses to check us out.
Next projects?
Sky and I are still talking about what we might do next, but our focus is still on getting this out there. There's a couple things that we've discussed, and
yeah, there's a documentary, another documentary, environmental focused documentary. There's a fiction piece that we're looking at, but stay tuned.
All right, cool. Well, thank you for what you've given us so far. We appreciate it. And then you guys got a vast history in doing a lot of films. I looked up Sky and you, Jeff, as well, and you guys have done some great work. Thank you for all the stuff you guys are doing. Again, here is director and producer, Mr. Sky Wallen and Mr. Jeff Hammer of Gadfly. And please go find it at any streaming service you can when it comes out. He said in January, and let's make sure we support these two fabulous filmmakers. Thank you again.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot. Appreciate it. Thank you all.